Mid-February 1943, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel sat in his command post near the Tunisian border writing a letter to his wife, Lucy. His forces had just smashed through American positions at Kasserine Pass. Outside, the Afrika Korps was celebrating victory. Inside, Rommel was analyzing what he had learned about the Americans. The letter was blunt. Rommel wrote that the Americans were soft, lacked proper training, and their officers made amateur mistakes that would have gotten them court-martialed in any European army. Rommel had just watched American forces break and run at Kasserine Pass. Over 6,000 American casualties in 6 days. Entire battalions surrendered. Equipment abandoned on the battlefield. It was the kind of collapse Rommel had seen from the French in 1940. The Americans didn't just lose at Kasserine. They were humiliated. Soldiers who had grown up on stories of World War I heroism were suddenly questioning if they were cut out for this. Rommel didn't just see a tactical opening. He thought he was witnessing the American spirit breaking in real time. He wrote to Lucy that if Germany could launch another offensive within weeks, they could push the Americans into the sea before they learned how to fight properly. The assessment was shared with Berlin. Exploit American weakness immediately. Don't give them time to adapt. Rommel's assessment wasn't based on prejudice. It was based on observed performance. At Kasserine Pass, American forces had demonstrated multiple critical failures. Their commanders positioned units poorly, radio discipline collapsed under pressure, and coordination between infantry and armor was non-existent. When German forces attacked, American units retreated without orders, creating cascading panic. The American Second Corps commander, Major General Lloyd Fredendall, had built his headquarters in a canyon 70 miles behind the front lines. He communicated by radio and telephone without seeing the battlefield. His orders were confused and contradictory. German intelligence officers compiled detailed reports. American equipment was adequate, and American soldiers fought bravely when cornered, but American command structure was amateur. These were not soldiers who had faced the Wehrmacht before. They were learning warfare in real time against Germany's best. Rommel calculated it would take the Americans at least 6 months to fix their leadership problems, and probably 12 months to develop effective doctrine. If Germany struck again in March, the results would be similar to Kasserine. German armored doctrine had proven itself against every opponent since 1939. Concentrate superior force at a weak point, break through with armored spearheads, and exploit the breakthrough with mobile formations to force the enemy to retreat or be encircled. This doctrine had shattered French armies in 6 weeks and destroyed Soviet armies in 1941. Kasserine Pass had proven the Americans fought the same way as previous victims. They established defensive positions and waited to be attacked. When German armor concentrated against weak sectors, American forces retreated rather than counterattack. Rommel studied the terrain around El Gueter in central Tunisia. It was perfect for another demonstration. If German forces attacked there in late March, they would catch American units still recovering from Kasserine. Berlin approved Rommel's assessment. One more offensive would break American morale completely. Then Germany could shift forces to face the British, while Americans shipped their defeated army home. German intelligence reported a command change in early March. Lieutenant General George S. Patton Jr. had assumed command of 2nd Corps on March 6, 1943, the same corps that had collapsed at Kasserine Pass. When Patton arrived at 2nd Corps headquarters, the atmosphere changed before he even spoke. He rolled in with a siren-blaring motorcade, wearing his famous ivory-handled revolvers. He didn't just issue orders, he issued an ultimatum. The days of the soft American were over. Patton forced men to wear ties and regulation helmets in the desert heat, not out of vanity, but to remind them they were professionals, not defeated refugees. Officers who arrived without proper uniforms were fined on the spot. Soldiers who didn't salute were reprimanded publicly. The German assessment was that one general couldn't fix systemic problems in 3 weeks. Patton might improve morale slightly, but he couldn't teach an entire corps new doctrine in less than a month. Rommel's health was failing, but his tactical mind was sharp. He reviewed the Elgeter attack plan one final time before turning operational command over to General Hans-Eugen von Arnim. The plan assumed American defensive tactics, American hesitation under pressure, and that 3 weeks wasn't enough time to transform an army. On March 22, 1943, German forces prepared to attack near Elgeter. The German order of battle included the 10th Panzer Division and the experienced Italian Centauro Division. German commanders briefed their units on expected American responses. They would defend from fixed positions, call for air support that might not arrive, and retreat under pressure. German tanks had superior firepower. German 75 guns could penetrate Sherman armor at 2,000 yards, while Sherman guns needed to close to 500 yards. The technical advantage was decisive. Dawn broke over Elgeter on March 23. German forces advanced, expecting another victory. They were about to discover that 3 weeks was enough time to change everything. The attack began at 6:00 a.m. Lead elements of the 10th Panzer Division rolled toward American positions held by the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. Everything matched the operational plan until American artillery opened fire. Not ranging shots, but coordinated time-on-target salvos that dropped multiple batteries on German positions simultaneously. Every gun in Second Corps could concentrate its fire on a single point at the exact same second. This level of artillery coordination was something German forces could not replicate. The accuracy was shocking. The Americans weren't suppressed. They were firing back with precision that suggested professional forward observers and experienced artillery crews. The 10th Panzer Division kept advancing, expecting Americans to break under sustained pressure. Instead, American tank destroyers opened fire from concealed positions. The Americans weren't defending from obvious positions. They had positioned anti-tank weapons to create crossfires. By 9:00 a.m., German forces had penetrated 2,000 yards, but the Americans weren't retreating. They were conducting fighting withdrawals to prepared secondary positions. For the men of the Big Red One, Elgeter wasn't just a battle, it was an exorcism. They were the same soldiers who had been humiliated at Kasserine Pass, but they had traded their fear for cold, professional rage. German radio intercepts picked up American communications. The tone was professional and calm. Officers were giving clear tactical orders. Units were reporting positions and coordinating fields of fire. They weren't running. They were executing tactical retreats that preserved unit cohesion while making German advances costly. By noon, the German advance had stalled. This wasn't the breakthrough Kasserine Pass had led German commanders to expect. General von Arnim received reports that the attack wasn't achieving objectives. American resistance was organized and effective. Something fundamental had changed. The Shermans were still outgunned, and the terrain was similar, but the Americans were fighting with coordination and aggression. On March 24, von Arnim recommended calling off the offensive. The attack was suspended, and German forces withdrew. German intelligence worked to understand what had happened. They needed to know what created the transformation. The Americans hadn't received new equipment or significant reinforcements. The change happened in 21 days under Patton's command. Patton's method was simple but radical. First, a leadership purge. He fired officers who hesitated and promoted men who attacked. Second, a doctrine revolution. Every unit learned to counterattack immediately when attacked. Artillery concentrated fire to achieve overwhelming effects. Defense meant aggressive patrolling and spoiling attacks, never passive waiting. Third, psychological transformation. Patton convinced soldiers they were superior, not through speeches, but through training that rewarded aggression and punished caution. The entire Corps learned one lesson: attack succeeds, hesitation fails. German commanders analyzed what Elgeter revealed. The Americans had adopted a doctrine that neutralized German tactical advantages. German doctrine relied on concentrated armor. American doctrine responded with mobile anti-tank weapons positioned to create crossfire. Rommel had written revised assessments before leaving Tunisia. The Americans had learned faster than any opponent Germany had faced. They had identified their weaknesses at Kasserine and fixed them in 3 weeks. On March 6, 1943, two critical events happened. Rommel launched his final North African offensive against the British, which was a disaster, and George Patton assumed command of the American Second Corps. Rommel's exit and Patton's entrance occurred at the same moment. Rommel never returned to Africa. Before he left, he warned that American forces under new leadership were showing rapid improvement. Any future operations should not assume they would break like at Kasserine. His warning came too late. The attack at El Gueter confirmed everything he had predicted. On May 13, 1943, German forces in Tunisia surrendered. The North African campaign was over. The Americans had gone from humiliation at Kasserine Pass to victory in Tunisia in less than 3 months. German commanders studied American performance and issued new tactical guidance. They warned defenders to expect aggressive American tactics with rapid armored advances and concentrated artillery. When Allied forces landed in Sicily, those warnings proved accurate. American forces under Patton's 7th Army advanced rapidly. German defenders reported that American tactical aggression, combined with superior logistics, made defensive operations nearly impossible. By June 1944, Rommel commanded German forces defending France. He deployed defensive doctrine specifically designed to counter American aggressive tactics. His assessment had changed completely from his February 1943 letters. He now wrote that Americans had shown themselves to be very much more advanced in their tactical thinking than the British. When D-Day came, American forces at Utah and Omaha beaches pushed inland aggressively despite heavy casualties. Rommel understood what other German generals were still learning. The Americans weren't the soft, poorly trained force from Kasserine Pass. They were a professional army with doctrine designed to exploit material superiority through aggressive force. After Germany's surrender, Allied interrogators interviewed German generals. The testimony was consistent, a begrudging, almost startled respect. They had expected Americans to be slow to learn and easy to demoralize. Instead, they found an opponent that evolved at a speed that felt unfair. General von Manteuffel stated that Americans learned faster than any army Germany faced. Field Marshal Kesselring testified that American artillery coordination was the most effective he encountered. German generals emphasized that the transformation wasn't about equipment, but about combining material advantage with aggressive doctrine. The same army that lost at Kasserine Pass had become one of the most effective fighting forces in history. Rommel's initial assessment was logical, as armies usually needed years to develop doctrine. Patton proved that wrong in 3 weeks. The transformation showed at El Gueter, but it took 90 days for German commanders to fully accept that the improvement was permanent. The first 3 weeks changed the doctrine. The next 2 months proved the change was irreversible. By May 13, 1943, German generals understood the Americans who had broken at Kasserine were gone forever. Leadership mattered more than experience. Doctrine mattered more than equipment. Aggressive mindset mattered more than technical superiority. The Germans built better tanks. The Americans built better doctrine. The 90 days between the shame of Kasserine and the triumph in Tunisia changed the course of the century. It was the moment the arsenal of democracy found its sword. German generals stopped underestimating American soldiers because they realized the man across the foxhole wasn't a tourist. He was the architect of their inevitable defeat.